Well, here's a little domestic scene, a bit like my childhood, really. And it's strange, isn't it, how people are, because they're kept indoors because of the dreaded COVID, they're having to occupy themselves. And I wonder how many people are doing this, have suddenly taken up to knitting. Here's Sandra. When did you start knitting, Sandra?
Well, I started knitting when my daughter was a baby, which was 45 years ago, but I only knitted baby clothes and then I haven't knitted since. So I then started knitting adult clothes about 2 months ago.
Right. Where did you learn your basic knitting?
Well, from my mother, I suppose, and of course they used to teach us in those days. They used to teach us at school.
Oh, domestic, whatever they used to call
domestic,
it. Right.
Science, I think it was.
Now, obviously, I can see, I even know that you actually drop off to sleep sometimes knitting away there. It's obviously very therapeutic in this current circumstance, isn't it? There must be lots of people doing this and they finding it meditating, relaxing, whatever, takes their mind off things.
Yeah.
Was that what you think happens?
Well, yes, I do, and it's just, it's very therapeutic. You've got something at the end of it, which is quite satisfying, and you've got to follow a sort of pattern. Well, it can be as plain or as complicated as you like. I just like a plain pattern. And then, of course, it's all the whole thing, isn't it? Going to get the wool, because there's a wool shop up here that sells absolutely everything to do with knitting and crochet. And all the women sort of seem to meet up there. It's like a little club.
Is it only women?
Yeah, I've never seen men buying wool up there, no.
Really?
But men do knit.
Yeah, of course they do.
They do, but I've not seen any up there, no.
Of course, we're in an island where knitting of stockings and other things, it was big industry back in my historical times. And then the knitting then was extraordinarily fine. The stockings they made were so labour intensive.
Yeah.
And of course they used to treat the wool, buy the raw wool and do the whole thing, the combing of the wool, they used to do all that here. And smuggle the wool, of course, the surplus wool, because there was a hell of a demand for it. But they used to get paid pennies for doing it. It must have been an extraordinarily difficult way of... Is it at all... obviously you're doing it for a pay. You can put it down and stop. You don't have to finish an item, do you? You're not doing it to a deadline.
No.
So... And that you've got that little lamp on there. You've chosen your own lighting. If you were... Can you imagine yourself knitting in the 18th century, for example, with very limited lighting? No. Short, you strictly according to the daylight? And bear in mind, you had to do other things as well. You had to live. You had to do all the other normal things.
It was very fine wool, wasn't it? And, the needles must have been like little spindles,
right.
Tiny, tiny little thin needles. These are sort of like, 8mm or something like that. Or, right. No, 5, I think 5mm. Well, they're probably a millimetre. Well, it wouldn't be millimetres then, would it? But no. It'd probably be like
I do wonder. I wonder how they did it, because I would imagine actually physically holding small little needles must be very difficult. You've got a chunky needle, at least you can grab the thing. Can't you?
Well, that's right. Yeah.
What are those needles you've got there? What are they made of?
These are bamboo.
Bamboo, right?
Yeah. They're quite nice to knit with, actually. When they're new, they're a bit raw, and they don't slide very well. But now they've been used a little bit, and they've got this sort of shine on them, and it just sort of slips through the stitches.
Right.
This wool is quite nice to use. It's Aran wool.
Right.
Some of the wool is a bit... There are so many different grades of wool.
Right.
If you get a cheap wool, that's difficult to use sometimes,
of course,
because it splits.
The irony is now that it's been through the stage where they can't sell wool and nobody wants to buy it because it's surplus of it. And
well, it's not wool, is it?
Well, a lot of the stuff that they have, the traditional farmers in England with the sheep out on the downs for the winter,
right.
and all that.
This is Aran,
Right.
but it's only I don't know what percentage of wool it is. It's I think it's only it's only 30% wool,
Right. Okay.
70% acrylic.
Right.
You know, and you can sort of like wash it in the washing machine, tumble dry it. But with real wool, but they do sell natural wool.
Well, there's a few sheep in Jersey. Somebody's looking after a few. I don't know. They do have them sheared. I mean, they do take the wool off them. I don't know who makes
Well,
stuff.
they do import natural wool as well.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
With
understand.
and coloured with the natural colours.
Right.
You know, the greens and the
Right.
browns.
A very subtle, natural shade.
But it's
very
quite
subtle.
expensive.
Is it?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, it would be. You'll know at the end of this, you're knitting something there without sleeves, I can see. But you did knit a monster, which I will get you to show in a moment. Your monster effort.
Oh, it's in another room.
You have to go and get it. We'll stop film for a little bit. We'll get you to. It's big enough for an elephant. It's made out of a very thick wool. I don't know what you're going to do with it, but we.
Well, it'll be useful for sitting in the house when all the heating's off.
Right, which. That's the latest disaster which might befall us all, isn't it? Incidentally, for the viewers at home, the dead animal which is on your chair at the back was not shot recently. It's
it's acrylic.
It's acrylic, yes.
And it's got electric wires running through it.
Right, okay. That gives me an idea for your sweater. We could put electric wires in the sweater you're knitting, couldn't we?
Yes.
And have a heated sweater.
But you see, this is coming along quite nicely.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, it's a nice colour, a good colour. I don't know whether with natural colours you'd get that sort of intensity of red. I don't know whether you would. It is very nice.
Well, you probably would, wouldn't you?
Would you? I remember my mum. She used to unknit things and knit them again. She used to salvage the wool.
You know, I mean, there are natural colours. This colour.
Right. Are they that deeper colour?
Well, I don't know about wool dyes, but I mean in digging, you know,
Right, okay.
you know, well, I've been to Pompeii,
All right.
and there was some bright red,
Really?
painted.
I suppose they used to crunch up. What's those things?
Yeah.
What's that little insect they used to crunch up for makeup?
Oh, that cochineal.
Cochineal. There's some quite deep colours out there if you know where they are. aren't they? So, therapeutically, this is ideal if you're going to be locked in, as we're all going to be locked in, so it seems, for a long time. You've got a little... the sad part about it is, of course, it's not very social insofar as you can't invite your mates round to have it because you've got to be one little bubble.
Yes, but if you're in a bubble, I've got a friend in my bubble who also knits.
Right.
So, you know, we sort of, compare notes on our knitting, and I mean, I have to say she's a better knitter than me.
Of course, in the bigger dimension, and of course of the climate change and all the rest of it, there's quite a strong lobby that we should all be returning to exactly this sort of activity. I don't know about the acrylic wool, I don't know where the wool's going to come from, but this is the sort of dream world for a lot of people, isn't it? Being self-sufficient, making your own clothes, growing your own food, all those sorts of things, but... whether it's ever possible, I don't know. But it looks nice. I mean, look, it's the ideal little scene here, isn't it? You've got a little pretend fireplace, and it does look good, doesn't it?
Candles.
Hey,
Candles.
Candles, that's right. Well, that's
Cup of tea, you know.
cup of tea. Ah, that's a good idea. A cup of tea. So, how long? Well, we don't know how long this bloody lockdown's going to go on for. But do you think you will get more into knitting? Is it now you've started it? You've been very intensive. I'm watching you knitting.
Well, yes. I mean, I would like to say yes, but there are other things to do.
Because it's not cheap. I mean, you get wool. How much?
I know.
To make a sweater with arms, it would be quite an expensive project.
Yeah, I mean, well, you can get. I mean, well, this has only taken one ball of wool.
Right.
400 grams of wool.
And how much is that?
The 400 grams of wool is about £11.
£11, all right, okay.
Which is a decent wool.
Right.
You know, it's a decent one, but you can get it much cheaper than that.
Okay.
But I mean, I bought a cheap one the other day to do something, but it doesn't knit well. It doesn't knit properly. It doesn't knit properly to the pattern. You have a pattern you know, that you need a pattern for the measurements.
Right.
But if it doesn't knit properly to the pattern, the garment's not going to fit, is it? You know, so
Of course, on
it's
television,
false economy.
on television, there's all sorts of programs. Baking, they got an absolute food making obsession. We're all, you know, why they're doing that, I do not know. I think the British must be the worst cooks in the world.
Well, they've
but
just
they're
had
obsessed.
Raymond Blanc on.
Have they?
Yeah, doing something. He's making, it's something with choux pastry in a tower that he's had for both of his wedding cakes.
But there are lots of programs of this sort of style, like the repair shop and things going
Repair
on,
shop,
which is quite
superb.
fascinating. But it's all got this nostalgia feel to it. No, can it be the real world? That's what I'm wondering. It's lovely to watch, and they go for these lovely, well lit things. It's all got that sombre colours. I mean, even the old motorbike show, that's extraordinarily attractive. Now, obviously, that won't go down too well with the climate change, but there's cooking, there's dressmaking, all these sort of activities where people are making and doing. Gardening, of course, there's always been a British obsession with gardening. But, so, sign here, isn't it? It's a case of sign up.
Well, that's right, yeah.
We don't need...
But you know, with knitting, you know, I know some people who say, oh no, I can't knit. I mean, it's very easy, but then I can't crochet. It's how you hold the wool. I cannot. You have to hold the wool a certain way to get the tension on it. So...
Well, as I explained to you, as a child, my mother taught me to knit, and the knitting got wider and wider and wider because I had to keep gaining stitches, and I had the big fattest needle. We'll stop there, and we'll get you to bring in the elephant suit that you've knitted. All right, you've been out and you've picked up the elephant suit. It's rather unkind to call it that, but this is one...
Well, yes, it is unkind because it's for me to wear.
Just show us how...
Well,
big it is.
It's enormous. I've already knitted it once and undone it, and knitted it again in a smaller pattern, but it's massive. But you see the stitches. Look at the thick.
I can't see them. Can you bring it up a bit? Lift
The
it up
thick.
A bit? Yeah. That's
It's
right.
so it's enormous.
Right. It is, isn't it?
But it's so heavy. It's not that there's no wool in it. It is all acrylic,
Right.
but it's a very heavy gauge wool, and extremely heavy gauge needles to knit it.
And what are they? Are they wooden or are they not?
These are plastic.
They're plastic.
These are 15mm,
Right.
but I started off with these.
What's that piece of wire you've got there? What's that?
That's a circular needle.
A circular needle.
Yeah, this is a circular needle to pick up stitches to finish off with a rib. Like I made this other cardigan somewhere. This
Right.
I made
Right.
like that. So to make this, the buttonholes and where the buttons go, sort of to finish off all round there, you pick up all the stitches around with the circular needle and knit all round.
Well, for a technophobe like myself, I wonder how on earth anybody designs these
don't know
patterns. How do they work it out? Because you have to have a computer-like brain. And that must be part of the complication of when you're knitting, to remember where you are in the pattern.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, and you have to. There's a lot of counting. You know, when you're doing buttonholes, you have to count so many rows. You know, and you have to count when you're doing the raglan sleeves where to cast off your stitches.
Right.
You know, so it's but it keeps you a little bit awake. You know. It's not quite as demanding as sort of a cryptic crossword, but...
And you do finish up with a product.
You finish up with a product, and it's very satisfying
Right.
to watch it grow. Sometimes you drop stitches and you have to go back and find where the hole, you know, where the stitch has been dropped. So unpicking. When I unpicked the big pink thing to knit again, it took me a whole evening
Right.
to unpick it
Really?
and rewind all the wool into
it?
balls again.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was able to rewound. You could re-knit it.
Yeah.
It didn't put up a fight.
No.
It didn't remember what it had been. See, now I'm going to have to do some research on knitting to find out some clever so-and-so somewhere back in the Dark Ages invented knitting. And I'm wondering to myself how on earth they did it. What did they start with?
I don't know.
I
I mean, this is why this is called stocking stitch. As you can see, that is where, if you look very closely
Right.
at a pair of tights, it's the same sort of
Right.
stitch as it, because it stretches. It's very stretchy, you see. And then and the back is garter stitch.
Right.
But if you knit two sides garter stitch, it's a much tighter stitch.
Yeah, well, that's what it is, the garter, isn't it? I think
Yeah,
that's
that's garter
presumably that would be the
stitch.
top of the stocking, and that's what poor old Anne Boleyn was wearing on her last day. So, supposedly, I don't.
Much thicker.
Well, this is fascinating. I mean, I never thought I'd be interested to talk about knitting, but it is an interesting subject, and I.
See, so we're not all, all us. They always refer to sort of grannies. I remember once I was on holiday and we were on this coach, a couple of, my friends and I, all about the same age, and we were, having a bit of fun and acting really silly. And there's these young guys there saying, "Oh, I would have thought people your age should have be at home reading books and knitting." You see, so they think that as like an old person's.
In my childhood, which was a long time ago, there were always usually women. I don't remember any men knitting, but there were always women knitting. That was one of the things. That's what they did. Older women, usually older women, but people.
Well, you see, I suppose older women had the time to sit there and knit. But then my mum always used to knit, but my mother wasn't old.
No, the thing, obviously when you're a child, everybody's old,
Yeah,
aren't
she
they?
wasn't old. I mean, she must have been in her 20s and 30s when she used to do a lot of knitting. So, and then after the war, a lot of people knitted.
I suppose.
And they used to unravel stuff and re-knit it to make
that's
something
what
else.
my mum used to do. She used to unravel stuff.
Yeah.
Well, as you grew, it didn't fit you, so knit it again. And it's quite.
That's right.
When you think about it, it's quite a clever process, isn't it?
And then in the end, when it had really been taken as slogging, they used to cut it up into strips
Right.
and make mats with it, didn't
Absolutely, yeah, that's right, they did. Right, I'm going to stop, but I hope everybody knows what knitting is, but I hope it might stimulate a little discussion about. I'm especially interested in the history of Jersey Olds knitting because it was very fine work. It must have been so labour intensive for so little return. And there's a lot to it. You've got to get your sheep, you've got to feed your sheep, you've got to get the wool, you've got to spin the wool, you've got to clean the wool. There's a whole industry appertaining to before you finish up with a nice sweater, which you can.
Well, you'll have to do a selfie next because this is going to be for you, isn't it?
Oh, is it? Oh, is it? Christmas has arrived. Sure, yeah.